Hello students, this is Vaibhavi, your teacher, and today we are going to learn the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that is in short GATT. The GATT is the developed by the World Trade Organization. GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, provided the rules for much of world trade. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was born with 23 founding members. Some efforts were made on establish ITO, that means International Trade Organization, but due to its over ambitious nature and lack of cooperation from various countries, it failed. So, the GATT became the only multilateral instrument governing international trade from 1948 until the veto was established in 1995. For almost half a century, the GATT's basic legal principles remained constant. The trade rounds or multilateral negotiations proved as biggest leaps forwarded in international trade liberalization under GATT's working. In the early years, the GATT trade rounds concentrated on further reducing tariffs. The Uruguay round of 1986-94 was the last and most extensive effort. It led to the veto, a new set of agreements. The Uruguay round brought about the biggest reform of the world's trading system since GATT was created at the end of Second World War. This draft final act was compiled by the then GATT Director General Arthur Dunkel, who chaired the negotiations at official level in November 1992. The US and EU settled most of their differences on agriculture in deal known informally as Blair House Accord. The veto agreements cover goods, services, and intellectual property. They spell out the principles of liberalization and the permitted exceptions. They include individual countries' commitments to lower customs tariffs and other trade barriers, and to open and keep open service markets. They set procedures for settling disputes. They prescribe special treatment for developing countries. They require governments to make their trade policy transparent by notifying the veto about laws in force and measures adopted, and through regular reports by the Secretariat on countries' trade policies. Broad principles of veto. Those are based on three aspects. These principles first is GATT, that is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It is belong to for goods. GATTs, the General Agreement on Trade in Services. It is related to services. TRIPS, trade related aspects of intellectual property rights. So, further, there are the detailed and lengthy schedules of commitments made by individual countries along specific foreign products or service provided access to their markets. For GATT, these take the form of binding commitments on tariff for goods in general and combination of tariffs and quotas for some agriculture goods. For GATTs, the commitments state how much access foreign service provided are allowed for specific sectors, and they include list of types of services where individual countries say they are not applying the most favoritism principle of non-discrimination. So let's learn about nature of World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization establishment or it opened new era of international cooperation. The veto differs to a great extent as compared to earlier GATT. The nature of veto is as follows. First, work as negotiating forum. Essentially, the World Trade Organization is place where member governments go to try to sort out the trade problems they face with each other. The first step is to talk. The veto was born out of negotiations, and everything the veto does is the result of negotiations. The bulk of the veto's current work comes from the 1986 to 94 negotiations called the Uruguay Round and early negotiations under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. The veto is currently the host to new negotiations under the Doha Development Agenda launched in 2001. Second, it's a set of rules. At its heart are the veto agreements negotiated and signed by the bulk of the world's trading nations. Third, it helps to settle dispute. So, World Trade Organization helps the nations to settle their disputes. This is the third important side to the World Trade Organization's work. The trade relations often involve conflicting interests. Agreements include those painstakingly negotiated in World Trade Organization system, often need interpreting. The most harmonious way to settle these differences is through some neutral procedure based on an agreed legal foundation. That is, the purpose behind the dispute settlement process written into the World Trade Agreements. Third, it's a fourth, most favored nation MFN clause. This is the fourth one. Under the veto agreements, countries cannot normally discriminate between their trading partners, grant some a special favor, such a lower customs duty rate for one of their products. This is the example, and you have to do the same for all other veto members. This is the fifth one, national treatment. The mandate of veto is national treatment to foreign goods and institutions. It means treating foreigners and locally equal. So, these are the main points regarding to this. So, sixth one is that is freer trade gradually through negotiation. Veto tries to lowering trade barriers as one of the most obvious means of encouraging trade. The barriers concerned include custom duties and measures such as important bans or quotas that restrict quantities selectively. From time to time, other issues such as red tape and exchange rate policies have also been discussed. 7. Encouraging development and economic reform. The veto system contributes to development. On the other hand, developing countries need flexibility in the time they take to implement the system's agreements, and the agreements themselves inherit the earlier provision of GATT that allow for special assistance and trade consciousness for developing countries. So, what is the now we think over that after learning about the veto, let's discuss how veto impact. So, impact of veto. The working of veto has changed the rules of the game. It has affected agriculture in great way and induced the countries to reduce the subsidies. The provisions regarding services, intellectual property rights, and trade related investment measures will affect the interest of all the countries in general and developing countries in particular. Now let's discuss what are the provisions of veto in these sectors and how it is going to affect the international trade. So first, veto and agriculture. The achievement of veto in the field of agriculture is significant. Now all important restrictions that did not take the form of tariffs such as quotas have been converted to tariffs, a process known as tariffication. This has made markets substantially more predictable for agriculture. Previously, more than 30% of agriculture produce had faced quotas or import restrictions. The first step in tariffication was to replace these restrictions with tariffs that represented about the same level of protection. Then, over 6 years from 1995 to 2000, these tariffs were gradually reduced. The market access commitments on agriculture also eliminate previous import bans on certain products. The new rules and commitments apply to market access, domestic support, then export subsidies and other methods. The agreement does not allow governments to support their rural economies but preferably through policies that cause less distortion to trade. It also allows some flexibility in the way commitments are implemented. Developing countries do not have to cut their subsidies or lower their tariffs as much as developed countries, and they are given extra time to complete their obligations. Least developed countries don't have to do this at all. Special provisions deal with the interest of countries that rely on imports for their food supplies and the concerns of least developed economics. Special safeguards for products whose non-tariff restrictions have been converted to tariffs, governments are allowed to take special emergency actions in order to prevent swiftly falling prices or surges in imports from hurting their farmers. But the agreement specifies when and how those emergency actions can be introduced. For example, they cannot be used on imports within a tariff quota. So, World Trade Organization and subsidies. The basic purpose of World Trade Organization is to create less distorted trade environment. For this purpose, the subsidies provided by the countries are classified into three groups, and each group is given color label as in the tariff lights. Infrastructure and food security. They also include payments made directly to farmers that do not stimulate production, such as certain forms of direct income support, assistance to help farmers restructure agriculture, and direct payments under environmental and regional assistance programs. Then there are blue box. It concerns such measures which are certain direct payments to farmers where the farmers are required to limit productions, sometimes called blue box measures. Certain government assistance programs to encourage agriculture and rural development in developing countries, and other support on a small scale when compared with the total value of the product or products supported. Amber box. Domestic policies that do have a direct effect on production and trade have to be cut back. WTO members calculated how much support of this kind they were providing per year for the agriculture sector in the base years of 1986 to 88. Developed countries agreed to reduce these figures by 20% over 6 years starting in 1995. Developing countries agreed to make 30% cuts over 10 years. Least developed countries do not need to make any cuts. Export subsidies. The agriculture agreement prohibits export subsidies on agriculture products unless the subsidies are specified in members' list of commitments where they are listed. The agreement requires WTO members to cut both the amount of money they spent on export subsidies and the qualities of export that receives subsidies. SPS means sanitary and physiotherapy measures. Agreement Article 20 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade allows government to act on trade in order to protect human, animal or plant life or health, provided they do not discriminate or use this as a disguised protectionism. Member countries are encouraged to use international standards, guidelines and recommendations where they exist. When they do, they are unlikely to be challenged legally in a veto dispute. However, members may use measures which result in higher standards if there is scientific justification. TBT, Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement. The Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement tries to ensure the regulations, standards, testing, and certification procedures do not create unnecessary obstacles. GATS, the General Agreement on Trade in Services. This GATS is the first and only set of multilateral rules governing international trade in service. Negotiated in the Urgency round, it was developed in response to huge growth of the service economy over the past 30 years and the greater potential for trading services brought about by the communication revolution. Services represent the fastest growing sector of global economy and account for two-thirds of global output, one-third of global employment, and nearly 20% of global trade. Most favored nation treatment. Favor one, favor all. MFN means treating one's trading partners equally on the principle of non-discrimination. Under GATS, if a country allow foreign competition in a sector, equal opportunities in that sector should be given to the service provided from all of the World Trade Organization members. This applies even if the country has made no specific commitment to provide foreign companies access to its market under the veto. Transparency. GATT says government must publish all relevant laws and regulation and set up inquiry points within their bureaucracies. Foreign companies and governments can then use these inquiry points to obtain information about regulation in any service sector. And they have to notify the veto of any changes in regulations that apply to the services that come under specific commitments. TRIPS, that is, Agreement on Trade Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. The VETO's Agreement on Trade Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, negotiated in the 1986 and 94 Uruguay round, introduced the intellectual property rules into the multilateral trading system for the first time. Ideas and knowledge are an increasingly important part of trade. Most of the value of new medicines and other high technology products lies in the amount of invention, innovation, research, design, and testing involved. Films, music recordings, books, computer software, and online services are bought and sold because of the information and creativity they contain, not usually because of the plastic, metal, or paper used to make them. Following are the types of IPR. Those are copyright, trademarks, job indications, industrial designs, patents, integrated circuits, layout designs, undisclosed information and trade secrets, safeguards, emergency protection from imports. A World Trade Organization member may restrict imports of a product temporarily if its domestic industry is injured or threatened with injury caused by a surge in imports. Here, the injury has to be serious. Safeguards measures were always available under GATT. Investment measures reducing trade distortions. The Trade Related Investment Measures Agreement applies only to measures that affect trade in goods. It recognizes that certain measures can restrict and distort trade and states that no member shall apply any measures that discriminates against foreigners or foreign products. It also outlaws investment measures that lead to restriction in qualities. So the students today we learned about the trade and tariffs, that is GATT related other three aspects. Hope you understood and see you in the next session. Thank you.